The morning sun stretched long fingers of gold over the plains, spilling across a land that seemed endless in every direction. The sky was a pale, impossible blue, and the wind carried the faint scent of sage and dust. A lone rider cut a line through the landscape, a tall cowboy on a dun-colored horse, his hat pulled low, his shirt faded from sun and sweat. His name was Cade Lawson. Folks in the nearby towns knew him as a man who drifted from job to job, fixing fences, breaking horses, driving cattle, but never staying long enough to put down roots. He spoke little, worked hard, and slept under the stars more often than under a roof. Some said he was running from something. Others said he was simply a man born to the trail. Cade never answered the question himself. This week his work had brought him near the Rocking L, a spread of land most ranchers in the county whispered about with a mix of admiration and pity. It had once been a thriving operation, known for its sleek herd and strong horses, but the old owner had died the previous winter, leaving the place to his only daughter. Her name was Clara Whitaker. She had grown up on that land, learning how to ride and rope before she could read. But running a ranch alone was different from being the owner's daughter. Supplies had been stolen twice by rustlers, fences sagged, and the bank had started to circle like a buzzard. Still, Clara kept her head high. She rode the pastures herself at dawn, fixed fences alongside the hands, and handled the ledgers late into the night. She was known for her stubborn streak and for the way her brown hair refused to stay pinned, curling around her face no matter how tight she tied it back. Cade had seen her only once before, from a distance. He had been mending a gate for a neighboring ranch when she rode past, dust rising behind her horse. She sat the saddle with easy grace, but her jaw was set, eyes fixed on the horizon. Even at a distance there was something about her, not just her beauty, but the way she seemed to carry the weight of the land and refuse to buckle under it. Now, as Cade rode the back trail that skirted the Rocking L South pasture, he saw signs of that weight. Fences had fallen in two places. The creek crossing was choked with driftwood, and a line of cattle wandered too close to the riverbank. He slowed his horse, scanning the land. He hadn't planned on staying near the Rocking L, but he knew what a hard spring could do to a herd, or a person. Far off, near the cottonwoods, a single rider was moving fast along the bank. Even at this distance, Cade recognized the rider's posture, straight, sure, unyielding. Clara. She was driving a stray calf away from the water, cutting it off with sharp turns, trying to coax it back toward the herd. The river ran high from snowmelt, dark and fast under the sun. Cade pulled his horse to a stop and watched a moment. Something about the scene, the swollen current, the calf's panic, the horse dancing at the edge, put a knot in his gut. He had been near enough swollen rivers before to know how quickly they could turn. He shifted in the saddle, weighing whether to ride closer. Clara, unaware of him, pressed her horse harder. The calf bawled and darted, hooves slipping in the mud. Cade's eyes narrowed. He touched the brim of his hat, then nudged his horse forward, following the trail that would bring him to the river's edge. He didn't know it yet, but the line between stranger and savior was about to snap like a brittle fence post. Cade urged his horse down the slope toward the river at an easy lope, not wanting to spook the calf or Clara's horse. From where he rode, he could see the current more clearly now, a dark green ribbon racing between banks of mud and stone. Snowmelt had turned the usually tame creek into something mean, snatching at the roots of the cottonwoods and hurling debris downstream. Clara had her hands full. The little white-faced calf bawled and skittered at the edge, confused and scared. Clara's bay mare sidestepped and stamped, ears flicking back at the roar of the water. Clara leaned low in the saddle, murmuring to both animals, trying to ease them away from the bank. Her braid had come loose, strands of hair blowing across her face. Even from a distance, Cade could see the tension in her shoulders. He raised one gloved hand in a small wave as he approached. "Morning," he called, his voice carrying over the rush of the river, but kept gentle. "Need a hand?" Clara twisted in the saddle, startled. For a heartbeat, her eyes were wary, that quick defensive look of someone used to fending for herself. Then she seemed to recognize him as a working cowboy, not a threat. "Calf got loose from the herd," she called back. "Slipped the fence. I'm trying to keep it from going in." Cade nodded and brought his horse a little closer, but stayed at an angle, giving her space. "If I circle behind, I can push him your way. Might be easier." Clara hesitated, then gave a tight nod. "All right." Don't spook him. Cade shifted his weight and his dun gelding responded with an easy sidestep. They had worked together long enough to know each other's cues. He moved upstream, cutting a wide circle so as not to drive the calf into the water. The calf's head came up, nostrils flaring, eyes rolling white. Cade clicked his tongue softly, using the horse's presence like a wall, easing the animal toward Clara and the safer bank. For a few minutes it seemed to be working. The calf shuffled, then stopped near Clara's mare. She leaned out of the saddle, swinging her rope in a lazy circle, ready to snag it. Cade slowed, watching. The river hissed and snapped at the bank only a few feet away. Then everything happened at once. The calf bolted sideways, hooves sliding on the muddy edge. Clara's horse lunged after it. Mud gave way under the mare's front hoof, and with a sharp cry, both horse and rider slipped dangerously close to the river. The calf splashed into the shallows, thrashing. Clara jerked back on the reins, trying to stop her horse, but the bank crumbled beneath them. Cade kicked his gelding forward without thinking. "Hold on!" he shouted. He reached the bank just as Clara's mare scrambled to keep footing. Clara was half out of the saddle, reaching for the calf, her boot slipping from the stirrup. Cade saw the look on her face, determination edged with fear, and knew she was going to go in after the animal if he didn't act fast. "Let it go," he barked. But the roar of the water swallowed his words. The calf's bawl rose higher. Clara's mare shied, and Clara lost her grip on the saddle horn. In another heartbeat, she would be in the river. Cade swung down from his horse even as it slid to a stop, boots skidding in the mud. He felt the cold spray on his face and smelled the metallic tang of the swollen current. The world had narrowed to the woman on the bank, the frantic animal, and the water waiting to take them. "Easy," he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her, the horse, or himself. He reached for his rope. The distance between stranger and rescuer was closing fast. The rope in Cade's hand felt heavy, slick with mist from the river. He threw one quick glance at the current, dark water sliding fast, carrying sticks and clumps of grass, then back at Clara. Her bay mare was scrambling, hooves clattering on the stones, eyes wild. The calf had already splashed into the shallows, bawling, water swirling around its knees. "Clara!" Cade's voice cracked above the roar. "Let it go." But she couldn't seem to hear him. She had slid halfway out of the saddle, reaching for the calf. Her boot caught on the edge of the stirrup. One more slip and she'd be in the river with the animal. The bank itself was crumbling under their weight, chunks of mud dropping into the water like stones into a well. Cade didn't think. He ran forward, boots punching through the slick earth. He snagged the reins of Clara's mare with one hand and yanked hard, trying to pull the horse back onto solid ground. The mare reared, nostrils flaring, and Clara lost her grip on the saddle horn entirely. With a short cry, she pitched sideways, tumbling off the horse and into the water. The river swallowed her with a sound like tearing cloth. "Clara!" Cade lunged after her, throwing the reins aside. He ripped off his hat and coat as he ran, boots pounding down the bank. A flash of her skirt broke the surface downstream. Without stopping to think about how cold it would be or how fast it ran, he dove. The shock of the water stole his breath. It was ice-melt cold, gripping his chest like a fist. He kicked hard, forcing his arms through the current, eyes scanning for any sign of her. She surfaced ahead of him, gasping. Hair plastered to her face as the current spun her. She was reaching for something, maybe the bank, maybe the calf, maybe nothing at all, before the river rolled her under again. Cade fought to catch up, his muscles burning. "Hold on!" he shouted, though he doubted she could hear him. A floating branch slammed against his shoulder. He pushed it aside and kept swimming. She bobbed up again a few yards downstream, coughing, eyes wide. This time she saw him. She tried to speak, but the current spun her sideways. He stretched, fingers brushing her sleeve, then she slipped from his grasp again. The river's power surprised even him. It was stronger than it had looked from shore. He kicked harder, angling his body so the current would carry him closer to her instead of past. His boots were heavy. He kicked them off under the water and felt a surge of freedom in his legs. Another stroke, another, and then his hand caught her arm. She thrashed, instinctively trying to pull away, but he tightened his grip. "I've got you," he shouted, pulling her against him. "Easy now." Her head fell against his shoulder, her breath ragged and cold. "The calf," she gasped. "Forget the calf," he barked, already scanning ahead. The far bank sloped up more gently, dotted with willows. If he could angle them that way, the current might push them in. He wrapped one arm around her waist, keeping her face above water, and kicked with everything he had. The river fought them like a living thing, tugging, spinning, trying to pry her from his grasp. His lungs burned. For a moment he wondered if they'd both be swept away, lost under the green surge. But the willows were closer now. He gritted his teeth and kicked again, feeling the mud rise under his boots. Almost there, he panted. They slammed into the bank hard enough to bruise. Cade grabbed at a root, then another, hauling them up the slope inch by inch. Clara coughed, water streaming from her hair and clothes. He dragged her the last few feet onto the wet grass, both of them collapsing in a heap, the roar of the river fading behind them. For a long moment neither moved, only the sound of their ragged breathing breaking the quiet. The calf's distant bawl floated from downstream, but neither of them looked back. Cade rolled onto his side, still gripping her hand, making sure she was breathing. "You're safe now," he managed, voice hoarse. Her eyes fluttered open, dark with shock and gratitude. She clung to his arm, lips trembling, and whispered something he couldn't quite hear over the blood pounding in his ears. The river kept rushing past, but the danger had shifted. Something else, and something between them, had started moving just as fast. The river's roar faded to a dull hiss behind them as Cade crouched beside Clara on the grass. She was coughing up water, her hands gripping fistfuls of wet earth as though to anchor herself to the land. Her hat was gone, her braid a tangle, her skirt torn where the current had dragged her, but she was breathing. That was all Cade cared about in that moment. "You're all right," he said quietly, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "Easy now. You're safe." Her eyes fluttered open, dazed but aware. She focused on him, and for a second he thought she might cry. Instead, she gave a hoarse laugh that broke into another cough. I didn't think I'd make it out," she whispered. Cade squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did. Let's get you warm." He rose and scanned the bank. The calf was gone, swept downstream, and her mare had climbed back to firmer ground, trembling but unhurt. His own horse stood a few yards away, reins trailing, ears flicking nervously. He whistled, and the gelding trotted over. Cade looped the reins around a low branch, then returned to Clara. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded, but when she tried, her legs buckled. He caught her before she fell, feeling the tremor in her limbs through her soaked clothes. Without another word, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, chilled and shivering against his chest. She made a faint sound of protest but didn't push him away. The ride back to the ranch was slow and careful. Cade settled her in front of him on the saddle, wrapping his coat around her shoulders. She leaned against him, head resting just below his chin, her wet hair soaking his shirt. The smell of the river clung to both of them, cold water, mud, and something faintly sweet like crushed willows. The horse's steady gait was the only sound besides the wind. When the ranch house came into view, a long, low building with peeling paint and smoke curling from the chimney, Cade felt her stiffen slightly, as if bracing for the eyes of others. But the yard was empty. Most of the hands were still out on the range. He guided the horse to the porch, swung down, and helped her dismount. "Let's get you inside," he murmured. She moved as though in a dream, letting him guide her through the front door. The interior smelled of wood smoke and coffee. He found a blanket draped over a chair and wrapped it around her, then knelt to light more wood in the stove. She sat by the hearth, arms hugging herself, staring into the flames as they caught and flared. Cade crouched beside her. "You should change into dry clothes," he said gently. "Where's your room?" She blinked, seemed to come back to herself, then nodded toward the hallway. "First door on the right." Her voice was soft, roughened by cold. "There's a trunk at the foot of the bed. Could you?" "I'll get it." He fetched the trunk and left it beside her. Out of respect, he turned his back, staring out the window while she pulled on a dry dress. When she cleared her throat, he turned again. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes had steadied. "Thank you," she said simply. He shrugged, though his heart still pounded from the river. "Anyone would have done the same." "No." Her gaze held his. Not everyone would jump in after a fool who thought she could rescue a calf. She gave a weak smile. "Not after a stranger." Cade opened his mouth, then closed it again. The way she was looking at him made the room feel suddenly smaller. He busied himself with hanging his wet coat near the fire. "You're no fool," he said at last. "Just someone who cares more than most." She drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Maybe, but I owe you my life." Cade glanced at her, but she was staring into the fire, her profile lit gold and shadow by the flames. There was a new quiet between them, thicker than gratitude, heavier than politeness. He didn't name it, not yet. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside the little ranch house, something had shifted. The fire had burned low, throwing a warm orange glow across the parlor. Outside, dusk gathered over the plains, turning the sky the color of old copper. Kate had stayed by the stove, feeding it one log at a time. Clara sat near the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, her wet hair now a dark braid over one shoulder. The storm inside her seemed to have quieted, but there was still a flush in her cheeks, from warmth, from embarrassment, maybe from something else. He poured her a cup of coffee from the pot simmering on the stove. "Here," he said, handing it to her. Might help chase the cold out. Her fingers brushed his as she took it. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." He shrugged, moving back to lean against the doorframe. "You don't have to thank me. It's what anybody ought to do." She looked at him over the rim of the cup, eyes steady. "Not everybody would have risked the river. I know the men around here. I know how quick folks are to look away." She set the cup down, fingers lacing tightly in her lap. "You didn't look away." Cade shifted his weight, suddenly aware of the distance between them and how small the room felt. "I saw someone in trouble," he said. "That's all." But Clara shook her head slowly. "No, it's more than that." He opened his mouth to answer, but she stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. In the fading light, she seemed taller, her expression clear and unguarded in a way he hadn't seen before. She walked toward him, stopping only a step away. "I've been running this place alone since my father died," she said quietly. "Every day I wake up wondering if it'll be the day the bank takes it, or the fences give way, or the hands quit. Every day I tell myself I don't need anyone." Her voice trembled just a little, and today I nearly died proving it. Cade held her gaze, saying nothing. She took a breath, steadying herself. "You didn't just save me from the river. You saved me from that, from the stubbornness that was going to break me sooner or later." Her hands curled at her sides. "When you pulled me out, something inside me broke loose." "Clara," Cade started, but she lifted her chin and cut him off. "I belong to you." The words came low but firm, like a vow. "I don't mean like property. I mean my heart, my trust. I've never said that to anyone. But I'm saying it now." The room went very still. Cade could hear only the ticking of the old clock on the mantel and the low hiss of the fire. Clara's eyes were bright, not with fear but with a fierce kind of relief, as if speaking had lifted a weight from her chest. He searched her face. She looked young and strong and vulnerable all at once. He had seen people mistake gratitude for love before. He'd seen what came of it, but something in her tone told him this wasn't just gratitude. It was a choice she had already made long before the river, maybe in the way she'd watched him on the trail, maybe in the way she had always tried to do everything alone. Cade stepped away from the doorframe, closing the last of the distance between them. "Clara," he said softly, "what you're saying, it's a powerful thing. Don't give it because you think you owe me." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "I'm giving it because I want to." For a long heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing. The fire cracked softly, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, leaving only the two of them in the warm glow. Something unspoken passed between them, not a claim but a promise. The house grew quiet after Clara's confession. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Shadows from the mantel clock stretched long across the floorboards. Cade stood with one hand still hovering near her cheek, unsure what to do with it now. Her words hung in the air like the scent of rain after a storm, heavy, electric, impossible to ignore. He stepped back slowly. "Clara," his voice came rough. "You don't know me." "Not really." She straightened, the blanket slipping again from her shoulders. "I know enough. You saved me. You could have kept writing and you didn't. That tells me more than words." Cade moved toward the window, needing space. Outside the panes, the plain stretched into darkness, a lone coyote's cry echoing somewhere far off. He pressed a hand to the cool glass. "You think that's all there is to me? A man who jumps in a river? I've drifted from job to job for years. No roots, no promises. It's how I've stayed alive." He turned, finding her watching him quietly. "I've seen gratitude turn into chains before. Folks thinking they owe something. Folks thinking someone saved them so they have to give themselves over. It doesn't end well. Her eyes flashed, but not with anger. I'm not a chain, she said simply. And I'm not a debt you have to collect. The words cut through him more sharply than if she'd yelled. He raked a hand through his wet hair, feeling the grit of river sand at his scalp. You're asking me to stay, he said. I'm not. Her voice was steady. I'm telling you how I feel. What you do with it is yours to decide. That stopped him. All his life, women had been something glimpsed at a distance. The wives of ranchers who hired him, the girls in town who knew he'd be gone by spring. He'd always been the outsider, the one with a horse already saddled. The idea of someone declaring not ownership but choice unsettled him more than if she'd tried to hold him. You've got a ranch to run, he said finally. A life. You're strong enough to do it without me. Her gaze softened. Strong, maybe, but tired. Tired of fighting everything alone. She drew the blanket around herself and sank into the chair by the fire. I don't want to be saved like a damsel. I want a partner. I thought you should know before you ride off. Cade leaned against the windowsill, silent. Her words settled into him like dust on a trail coat. He had told himself 100 times that he wasn't made for staying, that he'd be a fool to try, yet something in him, the same part that had hurled him into the river without thinking, was stirring again. He crossed back to the fire and crouched in front of her. The flames cast both their faces in flickering light. If I stayed, he said carefully, it wouldn't be because you belonged to me. It'd be because I wanted to stand next to you. Fence post to fence post. Nothing less, nothing more. She met his eyes. That's all I'm asking? He searched her face. The woman he'd pulled from the river wasn't weak or broken. She was exactly what she'd always been, fierce, stubborn, alive. What had changed was his place in her story, and maybe hers in his. Cade reached for her hand. She let him take it, her fingers cool but steady in his. Let me think, he murmured. She nodded. Take your time. Sunrise always makes things clearer. They sat like that for a while, the only sound the crackle of the fire and the wind against the shutters. He felt the call of the open trail even now, but for the first time in years it wasn't the only call he heard. The first light of dawn crept through the curtains, turning the parlor pale gold. Cade had dozed in the chair by the fire, boots crossed at the ankles, hat tilted low. Clara had gone to her room hours before, but the sound of her quiet movements upstairs told him she too had slept little. He stood and stretched, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. His shirt was dry now, but the memory of the river still clung to his skin like a second chill. He poured a cup, staring out at the pastures. Morning mist hung low, veiling the fences and the grazing herd. The Rocking L was a beautiful place, even worn down. He could see why she fought for it. Boot steps creaked on the stairs. Clara appeared in the doorway, hair loose around her shoulders, a plain work dress on. She looked rested but cautious, as if unsure which version of him she would meet this morning. The drifter who would be gone by noon, or the man who might stay. Coffee? He asked quietly. She nodded. Thank you. She took the cup, warming her hands on it, eyes fixed on the view beyond the window. Looks like the river dropped a little overnight. Yeah, he said. Herd settled too. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and yet charged. Cade set his cup down. About last night. Clara turned, meeting his gaze. You don't have to say anything. I do. He took a slow breath. I've spent years keeping myself free. No ties, no promises. It's how I know who I am. But freedom isn't worth much if it leaves you alone with no one to ride beside. Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak. He stepped closer. When you said you belonged to me, I couldn't let that stand. People don't belong to people. But what you said after, that you wanted a partner, not a rescuer, that stuck with me. Clara's fingers tightened on the cup. And I've been thinking. He took off his hat and turned it in his hands. I don't know if I can be what you need forever, but I know I want to try. I want to stay. Not as someone you owe or someone who owns you, just as a man standing next to a woman who's worth standing next to. For a heartbeat, she simply looked at him. Then she set the cup on the windowsill and closed the distance between them. That's all I was asking, she said softly. He smiled, a small, rueful thing. Might take me time to learn how to stay put. I've never done it before. I'll teach you, she said. A spark of humor flickered in her tired eyes. First lesson starts with mending that south fence. He chuckled, the tension in his chest easing. Fair enough, she reached for his hand. He let her take it, rough calluses meeting hers. In the quiet morning light, it felt less like surrender, and more like a handshake to seal an unspoken agreement. Outside, the herd moved slowly across the misty pasture. Beyond them, the land rolled out in every direction, open, wild, but no longer empty. Cade thought of all the trails he had ridden and how none of them had ever truly led anywhere. For the first time, the idea of stopping didn't feel like a cage. It felt like coming home. Clara squeezed his hand once, then let go and squared her shoulders. "Come on," she said. "We've got work to do." "Yes, ma'am," Cade said, grinning. He set his hat back on his head, feeling a strange, welcome weight in his chest. Not chains, roots. They stepped out onto the porch together. The sun had just cleared the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard. 2 sets of boot prints marked the steps as they walked side by side toward the day and toward whatever would come next. Spring melted into summer, and the rocking L slowly changed its shape. The south fence was rebuilt post by post. New calves fattened on fresh grass. The barn roof got patched before the monsoon storms. The bank stopped circling when Clara's books began to balance again. And through it all, Cade stayed. He still rose before dawn and saddled his horse out of habit, but instead of drifting toward some distant job, he turned back toward the house, toward her. The townsfolk noticed first. In the cafe and the supply store, they whispered about the drifter who had somehow become a fixture at the Rocking L. Some called him the cowboy who saved her. Others simply nodded and said, "He's hers now," but Clara never spoke of him that way. When she introduced him at the stock auction, she said, "This is Cade, my partner." And Cade, to his own quiet surprise, felt proud rather than trapped. Evenings became a ritual. After the herd was checked and the tools put away, they would sit on the porch with mugs of coffee, boots propped on the rail. The plains would stretch out before them, all gold and shadow, the wind combing the grass like fingers through hair. Sometimes they spoke of plans, rotating the pastures, repairing the north well, maybe buying a stud horse to breed. And sometimes they said nothing at all, letting the silence settle between them like a comfortable blanket. Cade learned the small intimacies of staying put. How the sun cut through the window of the kitchen at noon. How Clara hummed under her breath when she was tallying ledgers. How the smell of her bread drifted out of the oven just before dinner. Clara, in turn, learned that freedom could live inside companionship. That leaning on someone didn't mean losing herself. One evening, near the end of summer, a thunderstorm rolled across the horizon. Cade stood on the porch watching lightning flicker far off and felt a tug in his chest, the old urge to ride out, to find some open trail. He thought of his years drifting and of all the mornings he'd woken under different skies. Then he heard Clara's laugh from inside the house, the low warm sound of it, and the urge faded like a mirage. He went in. She was at the table, mending a bridle. She looked up at him with that same clear gaze she'd had the day she said, "I belong to you," only now it carried something steadier. Not desperation, but trust. "You're quiet," she said. "Just thinking." "About leaving?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "About how I don't want to." She set the bridle down and crossed to him. "Good," she murmured. "Because this place needs both of us." "And so do I." They stood together at the window, watching rain sweep across the far pasture. Cade slipped an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him without hesitation. The thunder rolled and the wind rattled the shutters, but inside the house there was warmth and the smell of fresh coffee. Later, when the storm had passed and the sky turned deep blue again, Cade stepped outside and looked at the land stretching to the horizon. It was still wild and wide, but it no longer looked empty. He understood now that belonging didn't have to mean ownership, and staying didn't have to mean losing yourself. Sometimes it meant finding a place where your heart could finally rest. He turned back toward the doorway. Clara was waiting there, one hand on the frame, watching him with a smile that reached her eyes. "You ready?" she asked. "Always," he said. They walked out together into the damp evening air, the smell of wet earth rising around them. Side by side they moved toward the corrals to check the herd, their boots leaving a single trail of prints in the soft ground. The open sky arched over them, vast and bright, not a ceiling but a promise. For the first time in years, Cade felt that the long ride ahead was not a road away, but a road home.